It might be the middle of July, and hockey might feel never further away than it does right now. But we got a schedule to break down on today's edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers, I'm your host, Nick Zararis. I just wrapped up my third NHL season as a host on the Locked On Podcast Network, and I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network where we've got your team covered every day. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So on today's show, we are going to break down the NHL schedule release, which came out middle of the day on Wednesday, and breaking it down today for you guys on Thursday. We're going to start with how the schedule gets put together. We're going to talk about the logistics, the formula. We're going to talk about why the NHL is different from the other leagues and why it values a certain schedule layout. In our second segment, we'll hit on the key notes about the Oilers schedule for this upcoming season. First Battle of Alberta, first trip down to Florida, a brutal road trip in the middle of November to really set the tone, an early swing down the East Coast, the New York road trip being in the second week of October, and a whole lot more. And then in our final segment, we'll talk just about how rough the NHL schedule at large is, why it's so taxing, and why by the time we get to the end of June, that Stanley Cup champion almost always, like I would say 99.9% of the time, is a worthy champion. We don't get a lot of fluke winners of the Stanley Cup, maybe in a way you might in some of the other sports, even though generally speaking, I do feel like the team that wins the championship is well within reason to be said champion. So to start things out, since the Seattle Kraken entered the NHL a couple years ago, the NHL updated the way this schedule was laid out because it used to be a little bit different, but now we have a very straightforward formula for laying this out. So to start, every team is going to play 82 games. That's the baseline. We're going to go to 84 2 years from now, but that's 2 years from now. For now, you have 7 other teams in your division, not including you. You are going to play those teams 3 or 4 times. It rotates who you play 3 times, who you play 4 times, in and out. So you're playing them evenly over the course of several seasons. Then you're going to play 3 games against the teams in the other division of your conference. So the Oilers will play 3 each against Minnesota, Winnipeg, Nashville, St. Louis, Dallas, Colorado, the teams in that pocket. Then every team plays the other conference teams at least twice. So 2 Rangers, 2 Islanders, 2 Flyers, 2 Panthers, 2 Lightning, 2 Hurricanes. You get the gist of it. But the reason the NHL has this schedule, and the reason Major League Baseball implemented a version of this where everybody plays everybody at least once, is because those are the 2 most driven sports. And when we talk about the NHL, and I brought this up last week when we were talking about the collective bargaining agreement that was being worked on, and we'll do a CBA episode, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, it depends. But the NHL gets the largest share of its revenue from ticket sales of the 4 major North American sports by the most, far and away, more than 10% than the next closest league, which is Major League Baseball. And that's why hockey and the NHL really values the home and home for the non-conference opponents. Because if you're the Seattle Kraken, if you're the Columbus Blue Jackets, if you're the New York Islanders, if you're a team where how crowded your building is really dictates the attendance, having that one guaranteed game of Sidney Crosby, of Connor McDavid, of Alex Ovechkin, of Connor Bedard, of Macklin Celebrini, of Jack Hughes, whatever superstar player you're thinking of that entices you, that gets you to want to go to the game if you're on the fence, that's why the NHL wants to have everybody play everybody twice. That way, you are going to get at least one game with that marquee attraction. And it creates a little bit of buzz. And I have always liked this mindset because I do make these occasions, When the Oilers are in my neck of the woods, I'm going to see them play the Rangers, Islanders, and Devils over the course of 4 or 5 days because I want to see my favorite teams go at it. I want to see the Oilers in person. When the Wild are in the neighborhood, I want to see Kirill Kaprizov. When the Golden Knights are here and I want to see Eichel and now Mitch Marner, I will be going. When the Panthers are there to play the Devils or the Islanders or the Rangers, I will go because I want to see the Florida Panthers in person. I am very easily persuadable when it comes to getting in the door. And look, I understand that I am in the 99.9th percentile of hockey sicko where I'm just going to watch any hockey that's on. I have no qualms about watching the Sharks play the Kraken at 10 o'clock Eastern time on a Tuesday night, just because I want to watch hockey at the end of the day before I get to bed. I understand I'm a little bit different. But to a more casual or an average hockey fan, the opportunity to see a Sidney Crosby or an Alex Ovechkin as we're in the twilight of this era, that matters. We exist in a dynamic ticket pricing environment where teams will price the tickets for a given game based on who the opponent is. Relatively new phenomena in the last 20 years or so, where tickets within a season price, within a season ticket package, are priced within tiers where you have where you have a couple good games, you have a couple stinkers, and you have a couple okay ones, because they want to distribute the portfolio of available games across the board. And look, when we talk about this, there are some factors that are non-negotiables for the NHL. The NHL wants everybody playing each other at least once because they want to get these small market teams those shots in the arm of Connor McDavid and the Oilers, of Sid and the Penguins, of Ovi and the Capitals. That matters immensely to those individual teams. And that might not seem like a lot. We're talking about 5 to 10 extra games. But when gate revenue makes up that large a share of your team's revenues, which go into the larger pot, which ultimately gets distributed, every last ticket does count. And as we move forward into the next half of the 2020s, I will be curious to see what the NHL does as far as their next TV deal. The NFL, the NBA, they aren't as dependent on people coming to games, buying tickets, because their TV deals are bigger. And look, I'm not saying that if those leagues had cheaper or lower quality TV deals, they would be cheaper. I think, if anything, you're going to see further price gouging on the NHL's behalf, even if they get a better TV deal next time around. That's not going to correlate to cheaper tickets for us, because we know how the market works. Once prices go up, they do not come back down, barring drastic market reactions. So with that in mind, I do think it's interesting to talk about the schedule matrix in this way, because laying it out seems simple enough. And people have suggested tweaks and ideas. There was the idea of percolating a couple years ago, the idea maybe you do your home and homes if you're playing divisional opponents, kind of similar to the way a baseball series is, where you're going to play 3 or 4 games against the same team in a short window. I think there's an argument for that for the purposes of logistics, maybe make the travel a little bit less burdensome, maybe reduce some of the carbon footprint, which I know is something that Jonathan Toews, he was interviewed for a Mark Lazarus column several years back in The Athletic, talking about the idea of trying to implement the most eco-friendly schedule possible to reduce travel, to reduce long flights, and try and make these a bit more block heavy. And speaking of block heavy, we're going to get to the Oilers' rough 7-game road trip in November coming up next, and a whole lot more. So be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. Do you ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning for a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO to give you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is so much more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in just one place. So you're not just managing your money, you are building wealth. Something I, like most people in their 20s, am guilty of, is not being the most prudent of saver, the most prudent of planner. But ever since signing up for Monarch, I have set some relatively simple financial goals, saving up to pay off a vacation, getting a new pair of noise-canceling headphones, and Monarch makes it so easy to stay on track. So if you're ready to take control of your finances, you need to head over to monarchmoney.com today. And if you use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com, you'll get 50% off your first year subscription. One more time, because it is that good a deal. Locked On NHL at monarchmoney.com for half off your first year's subscription. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers as we are navigating Not quite the dog days. I generally classify the dog days of summer from a hockey perspective as that first week of August, because at that point, pretty much all of the notable free agents have signed. Most of the GMs are taking that month of August to set back to R&R and to recoup. And look, do I begrudge a lot of these people because I would do their job for like 1/100th of the salary and would be as feverishly passionate about it as I am doing a podcast? Yes. But at the end of the day, they are entitled to some time off, and I can accept that maybe the hockey mediascape will be a little boring for a few weeks and I'll have to come up with some of my own ideas as opposed to participating in a larger conversation. But with that said, you don't want to make too much of a schedule because you have so many questions. The biggest thing, of course, you don't know what the injury status of anybody's going to be like. Hockey is a brutal, physically demanding sport that asks you to keep answering the bell pretty much every other day for 6 months. And we'll talk more about just the grind of the NHL schedule in the next segment, so I don't want to go stepping on my own toes here. But clicking over to my note sheet here for ideas. Number one, and most importantly, the roughest stretch of the Oilers schedule is a pocket of games in November that are all on the road. You go from Philadelphia on November 12th, which is where this road trip starts, to Columbus. Okay, those are two teams that missed the playoffs. To Carolina, who's a very good team. To Buffalo, who's missed the playoffs. To Washington, who was runners-up for the President's Trophy last year. And then you have a swing through Florida, Tampa, and then the Florida Panthers, that November 22nd game. The climax of that road trip through the East Coast. And look, that November 22nd game against the Florida Panthers will not be a referendum on the Edmonton Oilers season. I know when these two teams played in the regular season last year, the Oilers pulled off that great comeback only to have the lead whittle away. I can still, if I close my eyes, I can picture the exact shot Sam Reinhart let go that banked in off of the back of Stuart Skinner's head, and the way Skinner immediately sulked his shoulders because he knew how bad he messed up on that shot. That is a shot that has a less than 1% chance of resulting in a goal. But when you are that good of a shooter in the way Reinhart is, and that skittish of a goalie the way Skinner can be, where all it takes is one for him to completely unravel, it's hard to feel great about those situations when you're an Oilers fan. And look, the season is a grind. You are going to play, like we talked about in that first segment, you're going to play everyone in your division 3 or 4 times, depending on the year. You've got 3 games against every team from the Central, and then you got 2 against every team from the other conference. Something the Oilers do have working for them, and I do think this is important. Even if we have a lot of questions about the Oilers, particularly their depth, who's going to play with who, what's that third pair defense going to look like, who's going to be on the wings with McDavid and Draisaitl, yes, there are a lot of questions. But when you go through it from a who would you rather be perspective, you start to feel a lot better because you think about just the Oilers division. Seattle does not concern me. The Sharks do not concern me. The Ducks do not concern me. Should the Flames? Maybe a little bit. I'm inclined to say I could see a world where the Flames are a bit annoying this year. I mean, I give the Flames a lot of credit. They hung around last year. They were reasonably good. They were better than anybody could have possibly expected them to be last year. And a lot of that credit goes to Dustin Wolf, who had a really nice first full rookie season in the NHL. The Canucks, I mean, you lose a JT Miller, you don't really replace that production. You bring back Brock Besser, you trade for Evander Kane. Sure, I could see a world where maybe the Canucks are a little more feisty if Thatcher Demko's healthy. But just in their division alone, I would say they're definitely better than Calgary, Vancouver, Anaheim, Seattle, and San Jose. I think based on the results of the last couple of postseasons and just the nature of that Kings roster, where their talent is concentrated, the ages of some of their key contributors, I think I don't have a lot of reservation about saying the Oilers are probably better than the Kings as well. And right there, you're already talking about a playoff spot. And that's one of the drawbacks if you're a bubble team, is that there are so many of these teams that are capable of hanging around in the conversation just because a lot of the bottom halves of these divisions are really bad. And as a brief aside, just listen here. So in the Atlantic, Boston, Buffalo, Detroit all missed the playoffs last year. Boston should be a little bit better. Montreal, we'll see if they're as good. Ottawa, we'll see if they're as good, or if those are more teams that were just taking advantage of the circumstances. Then you go to the Metro. The Flyers and Penguins both should be pretty bad. The Islanders, who picked first overall, probably not a playoff team. The Rangers, I think they're probably a playoff team, but I don't feel great about that. Columbus, who missed out on the playoffs by 2 points. The Devils, who, if they can stay healthy, are a playoff team, but as we know, they just cannot stay healthy. Then you go to the Central. You have Chicago, Nashville, Utah as the bottom half of these divisions. There are more than enough mediocre and bad teams for teams to hang around, and that's what happened last year. Montreal getting in with 91 points is the least a team's gotten in with in several years. Washington the year before was also pretty abysmal, the team that got in and got swept by the Rangers in the spring of 2024. But the way the schedule is laid out and the way the playoff format is set up, there is ample opportunity for you, if you're a good team, to just beat up on the bad teams. And I mean, we saw the Oilers do that this past regular season where they beat up on the bad teams. They had a meh record against playoff teams from the year prior. And ultimately, they ended up in the Stanley Cup final again. So again, that shows you the value or perceived value of the regular season. And then some of the other matchups that I thought were worth mentioning as a brief aside for you to calibrate your brain. The Oilers opened the season against the Calgary Flames, the Battle of Alberta, and they're done playing the Flames by February, which I don't necessarily like. And real quick, down the backstretch, Chicago, Vegas, Utah, San Jose, the Kings, Colorado, Vancouver. That Vancouver game probably matters for Vancouver. I don't know how much it'll matter for the Oilers, but that's I wouldn't say easy, but a reasonable pocket of games to close the season out on. Chicago and Utah and San Jose, for that matter, are all probably non-playoff teams. LA is a bubble team. Vancouver is a bubble team. When we think about that, the Oilers are in a position where if they just take care of their business, which means beating the bad teams, splitting against some of the better teams, you're going to be in a really good position to just make the playoffs. And when you think about it from that perspective, that's your baseline. Your first objective as a Stanley Cup contender is, can we make the playoffs, and can we be one of the three division teams? As we have yet to see in this format, in the three division teams from each division and 2 wildcard format, we have yet to see a Stanley Cup champion. The last time a team that was seeded in a 7 or 8, which would be the wildcards in this new format, win the whole thing was the LA Kings back in 2012. We have never seen a team with that wild card seeding win the whole thing. We've seen wild card teams make the Stanley Cup final. Florida did it 2 years ago when they lost to Vegas. The Montreal Canadiens were one of the wild card teams from that North Division back in 2021 during that truncated 56-game regular season. But by and large, you don't even need to have home ice, as we saw last year. The Oilers made it to the Stanley Cup final without home ice, and the only series they lost in last year's playoffs was the series with home ice, so which goes to show you just how funky this all shakes out to be. And yes, would you rather have home ice than not? In a vacuum, of course. But in actuality, the value of home ice has declined year over year as we've gotten better, as things have become more modernized, as infrastructure around these teams and the support staffs have gotten better. We are going to take our second and final break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, I'm going to tell you why the NHL schedule is so grueling and why, in spite of that, I can't help but love that part of the journey. Coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. We've all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to come away empty-handed for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of getting tickets, and that's where Gametime comes in. Gametime makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Did you know prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime? And you can save up to 60% with their last-minute deals. If you're tired of endless scrolling, trying to find the best deal, Gametime's own deal picked the best seats in your section for you. And my personal favorite part of the Gametime ticket experience is the panoramic seat view. So you get an idea of what you're walking into before you're at the venue. With Gametime, the price you see is the price you pay, no hidden fees. And If you're worried about your plans changing, the Game Time guarantee has your back covered with cancellation protection and so much more. If you're ready to take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Game Time, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. One more time, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers as we react to the Oilers schedule dropping in the middle of July. I wish there was a way the NHL could make the schedule drop a bit more of a big deal, but with such a long season, it's not really feasible to make it an occasion the way the NFL does. And look, I know the NFL schedules all get leaked over the course of days leading up to the schedule announcement because so many people know about it, but the NFL has made every part of their league an occasion, an event. It feels special. And the NHL is trying. I will always give the NHL its kudos for being willing to try things. The worst thing that can happen if you try something is it doesn't work. And at least you know it doesn't work. So the NHL schedule, and I have long maintained this, I think it's too long. I think 82 games is way too many. I also understand that by virtue of the way the money works, that is never being truncated. In fact, the NHL is going to get rid of preseason games to get more regular season games in the mix. And I don't think, and look, if we are talking about this purely from a hockey perspective, quality of hockey perspective, I think there are too many teams. I think there are too many games. But of course, you are never going to convince billionaires and the people who run the billionaires who own who facilitate the operations of the league. I shouldn't say Gary Bettman owns the owners. He doesn't. The owners own him. But the NHL operates on a pie splitting model where the owners try and get as big a piece of the pie for themselves as opposed to being as concerned about growing the overall shares of the pie. And the schedule, as much as I think it's too long and I think there are too many teams, and I think we could do a lot better job if we had a 24-team league and we played 60 games. I think the quality of play would be even better than it is. I think the average quality of an NHL player would dramatically increase because the cutoff point would get better. But those are all anti-growth positions, obviously. You need more teams, more revenue, more job opportunities for more players means more opportunities to get paid. So you have to understand the quality of hockey is often secondary in a lot of the decisions that the NHL makes. I mean, as much as we like the spectacle of the outdoor games, and even that is starting to wane as the novelty wears off, you have to realize that asking goalies to look into the sun for a period or two is not going to lead to great hockey. You know, I think about the Stadium Series game last year between the Rangers and Islanders, where pretty much all the goals were scored at one end of the ice, and it was the end where the goalie was looking at the sun. We're talking about some of these environments where it hasn't been that cold, and they've tried to play the games on some lower quality ice. It's rained at a couple of these outdoor games, and the NHL has tried to persist through, even though it's had an impact on the ice. And look, they are trying. The NHL likes the feel and the vibe of the Stadium Series, of the Winter Classic. So that's not going away. You're not getting the NHL to lose out on gate revenue because gate revenue makes up such a significant portion. But the schedule itself, and everydayers last year heard me make this spiel probably close to a dozen times over the course of 82 games. So if it's your first time, you should buckle up. But your season ends if you get to the Stanley Cup final last week of June. You have a week until the draft. You have 4 days till free agency. You have July, August. By the second week of September, you're going to be back in your team city. You might not be doing hockey activities, but if you have a second residence or you're traveling or you have occasions, you get back to your team city middle of September. Some teams, they're going to have informal workouts where guys on the team will organize them themselves. The team can't organize them because there are CBA rules about practice and use of facilities, but guys can organize their own stuff. We know the Oilers generally have what they call a captain's skate where McDavid will organize workouts and guys are there by mid-September. Then you have a week or two of preseason testing, which I think is important. You want to get a baseline on people's physical fitness. You want to get an understanding of how guys are dealing after recovering from ailments. When you're a team that consistently goes deep in the playoffs, a lot of guys are going to have lingering aches and pains and bruises and marks, and you want to see how those guys are doing. And then if you're a team like the Oilers, the preseason doesn't matter a whole lot. You have maybe 2 or 3 roster spots that are up for competition. I think the third pair right D between Stetcher and Emberson will probably be the most hotly contested spot in the lineup. I think I'll be curious to see how much Ike Howard plays versus he doesn't. I think if they take the training wheels off and just have him play as much as he can in the preseason, that would be a strong indicator that he's going to get a pretty prominent role on this team right away. I think if they shelter him a little bit more, maybe only use him a bit more sparingly, I think that would be a strong indicator that they're going to slow play him along. And then you think about Matthew Savoie's opportunity. And then after about 2 weeks of preseason, 3 weeks of preseason, you get to the regular season, that first week of October, and then the grind begins. October, November, December, January, you got a week for the All-Star break in there. This upcoming year, we'll have the Olympics, of course, which will make it a little bit longer. It's like 2.5 weeks. But February, March, April, half of April, excuse me. We're talking about 6.5 months from the time you reported for your informal workouts to the end of the regular season. And that's just a prerequisite. That's just to get to the playoffs. We weed the field in half. We go from 32 to 16. Of those 16 teams, we go to 8 and 4 and then 2, and we crown a champion. Oh, yeah. And that takes the rest of April, all of May, and half to 2/3 of June. We are talking, if you go to the Stanley Cup final, about 9 to 10 months. 9 to 10 months of your life to get to one best of 7 series. That's just to get to the Stanley Cup final. And that's why the variance within a postseason is so toxic and so concerning. Because you can be the better team, but that doesn't matter. Can you be the better team 4 out of 7 times? And that's after playing 82 regular season games. It creates such a harsh and grueling grind. And on top of that, it's not just enough to be a good team in the regular season. And look, the Oilers kind of bucked this last year. They weren't necessarily a particularly good regular season team. In fact, they didn't really make a lot of progress over the course of the regular season. Sure, that first month was really rough. They came out of the gate like 5-5-2. They were playing terrible defense. Their penalty kill was abysmal. Their power play wasn't working. And they stabilized from there. They had a really nice stretch of hockey from the end of November through the end of January. And then they hit a wall after the Four Nations. They weren't really as good, but they had banked enough points during that good stretch that they weren't really ever in danger of falling out of a playoff spot. But you want to bank as many points as early and as often as you can, because if you're playing well, you want to get rewarded. The more room you give yourself to account for mistakes, the more opportunities you have to buy yourself time, the better. You never know when the injury bug is going to pop up. You look at the Oilers last month of the season last year, where you had Hyman and McDavid and Draisaitl and Wallman and Ekholm, all dealing with various bumps and bruises that held them out of those last 5 to 10 games. That could have been a difference between home ice in the first round. Of course, as we discussed a lot last year, the Oilers were one of the few teams that was equipped to be able to handle those adverse circumstances because they had so many veterans. They were the oldest average team in the entire NHL. But we've got a long way to go before we get to the start of that journey in mid-September. I hope you will be here come mid-September and we can start talking about training camp battles. But before that, we got a lot of summer to get through. So if you're ready to buckle up and get on board, you need to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're on Apple or Spotify, please give the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, subscribe to the video, like the video. Let me know in the comments what you think about the NHL schedule. Is it too many games? Do you want to see more divisional opponents? Do you want to see 5 or 6 games against the Flames as opposed to only 3 or 4? Let me know down in the comments. Be sure to check out Locked On NHL and Locked On NHL Game Night on the Locked On NHL feeds, available wherever you get your podcasts and over on YouTube. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.